Hi, welcome Year 10. I'm going to go through the Algebra 3.8 shadow test on these videos. There are 4 pages, so there's probably going to be 4 videos, maybe quite long. Anyway, let's get stuck in. Question 1, we've got to factorise some quadratic expressions. These are all going to make double brackets when factorised. And the first thing I need to multiply together to get x squared is x and x. And then I figure out the numbers because they have to multiply together to give me 12. And add together to give me 8. So thinking of numbers that will do that, we've got 2 and 6. I'm not sure why I did it over there. Okay. For the next one, we can add x and x again. Numbers that multiply together to make 10. Ignore the negative for a moment. We've got 1 and 10, or 2 and 5. And the only ones I can use to make positive 3 are 2 and 5. And the way I do that is to have positive 5 and take away 2. Okay. Part C, x and x at the start of each bracket. Numbers that multiply together to make 5. There's only one option, 1 and 5. Now how do I make negative 4 using 1 and 5? I start with negative 5 and I add 1. And then finally for D, x and x at the start of each bracket. Numbers that multiply together to give me 12, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And how do I make negative 8 using one of those pairs? It has to be this middle pair, negative 2 and negative 6. Add them together, you'd get negative 8, but when we multiply them, we would get positive 12, so that's the pair I want. Okay, question 2 is solving quadratics. You'll notice it's the same Maths Watch clip number though, and that's because the easiest way to solve a quadratic is to factorise it first. So we're just going to factorise, this just contains one extra step to what we've just done. So when we factorise this expression, numbers that multiply together to give 18, so 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. I'm looking to add them and make 9, so it's going to be 3 and 6. Now the only thing I've got to do differently here is think about what value of x would make each bracket 0. So for this first bracket to be 0, what must x have been? Well, x must have been negative 3. And for this second bracket to be 0, x must have been negative 6. For solving equations, questions, solving quadratics, I always leave the equals 0 in after the brackets, just to remind myself that I'm not just factorising. There's an extra step to do. So 28, 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 4 and 7. And I need to make negative 3, so I'm going to have negative 7 and plus 4. So x is going to be equal to 7 and negative 4. Doesn't matter what order you give these in. Okay, and part C, numbers at times together to make 10, 1 and 10, and I can already see that I can make 11 with those. So negative 1 and negative 10, because remember they were times together to make positive 10, so x must be 1 or 10. And that's the first 2 questions. Okay, number 3. Factorise again and then solve again. They're very similar, and these might look like single bracket ones when you factorise them, but actually they're double bracket. This is all about the difference of 2 squares. If you've forgotten what that is, go back and watch the video that I recorded for it, or the Maths Watch clip. But in general, an easier way to think of this maybe when you're factorising is to put that middle term in that we don't seem to have with any of these. We'll just say we have 0 x's. So we're looking for 2 numbers that times together to make 16, add together to make 0. And that's going to be 4 and negative 4. Sorry, they times together to make negative 16. The fact that they add together to make 0 tells you that they must be the same number. There's one positive and one negative. Okay, we've got a coefficient of x squared. It will also be a square number on these sorts of questions. So 2x times 2x, and then we've got a plus 7 and a minus 7. And for part C, we've got an x plus 5y and an x minus 5y. And we're solving these exactly the same as above. Doesn't matter which you put first, by the way, the plus or the minus. We're just looking for what makes each bracket 0. So from this bracket, x must have been 5. From this bracket, x must be negative 5. Okay, slightly harder these ones. I would actually write a little equation that makes each bracket equal to 0 and then solve. So I would take away 5 from both sides, that would give me a negative 5, and then divide by 4, and just leave it as a fraction, 5 over 4. Okay, so there's one solution. From my other bracket, I would add 5 to both sides, that would give me positive 5 this time. Divide by 4, that would give me positive 5 over 4. It's easier than having to convert to a decimal. And finally, question 5, find the equation of each line. So remember, we want to use this format, the slope-intercept format, because it's much easier to just write down the equation of the line if we can just find the gradient, which is this number in front of x, and the y-intercept. So let's start with the y-intercept for line A. Well, it goes through 0 on the y-axis, so there's no point putting plus 0 at the end. So this is going to be y equals something x. Now the gradient we find by doing the rise divided by the run. So you want to draw yourself in a little triangle somewhere. Try to use the numbers on the axes rather than the squares. So there I've gone across 1 and I've gone up 1. So when I do rise divided by run, 1 divided by 1, I just get 1. So the gradient is 1. So actually this is just a line y equals x, or y equals 1x. Okay, it doesn't look like it, but that's because the scales on the graph have been altered. Right, line B, it goes through 1 on the y-axis, so it's going to be y equals something x plus 1. Okay, let's find its gradient. So find a nice point. There we go. Okay, so we've gone across 1. We've gone up 2 though this time. So when I do rise divided by run, 2 divided by 1, that will give me a gradient of 2. So the equation is y equals 2x plus 1. And finally, line C, it's our only one that's going downwards. And those of you who remember will know that that means it's got a negative gradient. Let's start with the y-intercept. It looks like it goes through negative 1.5 there. Okay, so I'm just looking for this number here now. Let's find a nice point that goes through there, and another one there. I always do the left to right bit first, it's personal preference. Okay, so I've gone across 2 there, and I've gone down 3, or there's been a rise of negative 3, is another way to think of it. So when I divide negative 3 by 2, I've got negative 3 over 2, or negative 1.5. Okay, I'll just put it in decimal form, seeing as I've given this in decimal form as well, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, next page will be on the next video.